Welcome back, everyone. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you. This is episode number 27. In today's episode, we got a few things to get into. Of course, we got to recap my picks from week 14. Then we're going to get into my question of the week. And then we're going to finish, of course, with my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week 14. So let's get into it. Okay, so to start off, we're going to recap my picks for week 14. Now, this week was a little tough going into it, but as you know, I have 5 picks that I do. My pick 3, my underdog pick of the week, and my lock of the week. Guess what? This week, I was 5-0. That's right. Every single pick this week, I was completely right. Yes, you're very welcome. Hopefully, you guys took my advice and you put bets down on it. But nonetheless, we're going to get into each one individually. Of course, first, we got to start off with my pick 3. Now, my pick 3 this week, again, I was undefeated, so I went 3-0. That brings my total record on the season to 29-10. So definitely a great record. We've gotten on a roll now that we've kind of figured out what teams are really, kind of their identity of each team has pretty much shown itself. So I think I've pretty much got it dialed in now. Now, the first game in my pick 3 was the Pittsburgh Steelers to beat the Cleveland Browns. And I was right. Pittsburgh was favored to win by 6.5 points. The final score was 27-14. So not only did Pittsburgh win, they did cover the spread. I mentioned in last week's episode that one of the reasons why I was picking Pittsburgh is because I felt like they really wanted to get revenge. They lost to Cleveland 2 weeks ago in a game that was an upset, even though Cleveland was at home in that game. There was heavy snow conditions that affected everyone. They took this chance to have this game at their house and show that they were completely the better team. This game actually was never in doubt. It wasn't close from the beginning. They jumped out to a lead and they basically pounded Cleveland from the jump. And this is essentially what people expected to happen the first time they played. Pittsburgh's defense looked a lot better than they did in the first game. Pittsburgh offense actually looked better also. So, as a collective, great win for Pittsburgh. There was a last-minute injury issue. Pickens wasn't able to play this week, and honestly, when they announced it right before the game, I was a little bit worried because Pickens is obviously their most explosive player, and we all know Russell Wilson likes to target him on one-on-one deep throws. So when he was ruled out, I was a little bit worried, like, might this pick end up being wrong? But thankfully, no. As we know, Pittsburgh is always one of the best coached teams in the league, and they showed that they were very much prepared for this matchup, even though they were going to be without one of their best players. So they were able to pull off the win. Great win from them. Picking up momentum as we get into this tougher, portion of their schedule where a lot of people thought they were going to kind of fall back to the previous expectations. If you recall, before the seasons, Pittsburgh's win total on this year from the sports books was 8.5. Right now, they already have 10 wins, so they've not only cleared that by a game and a half, they still have 4 games left in the season. So definitely, Pittsburgh is soaring high right now, and look forward to seeing all of this week's preparation stuff in the episode of Hard Knocks that's going to release this week. Now, the second pick in my pick 3 was the Miami Dolphins to beat the New York Jets. Now, Miami was favored to win by 6, and this one, they did not cover the spread. It was actually a push. Miami was able to win 32-26. The game did go into overtime. It was a close battle. The Jets actually performed a lot better than I expected. Aaron Rodgers actually threw for over 300 yards, which was the first time he had done so and I believe like 30 something games, something ridiculous. So the fact that they had their best offensive performance, yet they still lost the game. It did come down to overtime, and you saw Miami execute twice. Once they executed on the last drive to get in the field goal range so they could take the game into overtime. Then they executed again in overtime once they won the kick to make sure that the Jets never saw the ball again, which is that's what good teams do. They find a way to execute when they absolutely have to have it at the end of games. You'll hear a lot of that when I talk about some of the top teams in the league, and that's what Miami did in this game. The most surprising stat and situation of the game to me had to do with the Miami Dolphins tight end, Jonnu Smith. Now, Jonnu Smith has been on fire the last 2 to 3 weeks. He's had touchdowns in every game. And during this game, in the regular part of the game, he didn't have not one catch all game. Then, on the drive that they had in overtime, he ends up going for 3 catches and it's the game-winning touchdown catch. So they finally realized, like, hey, we should probably get this guy who's been on fire and involved in the game plan. They did that, and it paid off huge for them, and they were able to pull off the win. So definitely good momentum for Miami. They're creeping their way back up into that fight for the last playoff spot. We'll see if that continues. I believe the Jets are officially eliminated from playoff contention now. So, I mean, we all knew they were eliminated probably like a few weeks ago, but now it's official. So we'll see how the whole Aaron Rodgers thing kind of plays out the rest of the season. But they definitely took a tough loss this week. Now, the last pick in my pick 3 was the New Orleans Saints to beat the New York Giants. Now, the Saints were favored to win by 5.5. They did not cover the spread, but again, for our picks, we're just looking for winners. They did win the game, and that's what's important. The final score was 14-11. So, yeah, as you can tell from the final score, this game was pretty much a dud. Now, New Orleans was winning majority of the game. They pretty much looked like they had this game in hand, and then they just couldn't execute down the stretch. Derek Carr ended up injuring himself trying to jump for an extra yard. I think he landed on his wrist. I haven't seen the medical update, but it doesn't look good to me. Like, he might actually end up being done for the season. We'll see. But the defense then gave up some late scores to the Giants. The Giants had the ball, were able to drive down the field, down by 3, and get themselves into field goal range, and then the field goal got blocked, which is crazy because I think in the last, 4 weeks, we've seen 3 blocked field goals to win games. The first one was Kansas City against Denver. The next one was Green Bay against Chicago, and now New Orleans against the Giants. I can't recall seeing 3 blocked field goals, like in clutch situations too, not just like, in the middle of the game, but 3 blocked field goals in clutch situations in a season, let alone in like a 4-week span. So it's been pretty crazy. If you watch the play over, the guy who jumps over the guard is like 290 pounds. I talk about athleticism, to be able to jump over the center and then get there. It did take a huge impact on his knees because once he jumped and tried to jump again, he really couldn't. But thankfully, he was close enough to the ball at that point that by putting his hands up, he was able to get up his hand and block the kick. So great performance by him. And overall, not the strongest performance from New Orleans, but they were able to get the win. If you recall, they fired their head coach like 4 weeks ago. I believe they're now 2-1 since 2-1 or 3-1 since the interim head coach has been in place. So definitely they got something going right. Yes, the Giants aren't a good team, so it's like they didn't beat anybody impressive, but a win's a win. And in this league, if you can get a win, you got to be happy about it. So that was the last pick, part of my pick 3. Now on to my lock of the week. My lock of the week this week was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to beat the Las Vegas Raiders. Tampa Bay was favored by 6.5. They were able to cover the spread. The final score was 28-13. I said I felt very confident about this game. And if you look at the final score, you realize that, yeah, I was pretty much right. There was a time in, I think it was like the third quarter of this game, where Tampa Bay's offense seemed to stall and the Raiders seemed to be getting going. And I was getting a little worried, like, are they going to make a game of this? But then, of course, in true Raider fashion, they mess up and Tampa Bay was able to score again and stretch out the lead. And that was all she wrote. It's just like I said in last week's episode, it's just a bad matchup. The Raiders just don't have enough at the quarterback position. Hell, they don't have enough as a team to really beat anybody of significant value. That's why they've been in the bottom five for a long period of time. It's kind of crazy to think that earlier in the season, I think that was week 3 or so, they beat the Baltimore Ravens. And, all of the Raider fans were like, yeah, we got it going now and we got this momentum. And I don't think they've won a game since. So their season is a wrap. They're also eliminated from playoff contention, which, like I said, we've known for a long time. For Tampa Bay's case, though, this win was huge for them, especially because Atlanta, who's been leading their division for a long time, has been falling apart. And so with Tampa Bay getting back to winning more recently after dealing with all of the injuries that they've dealt with, they're now leading the NFC South. Now, it's kind of interesting, too, because New Orleans has started winning, too. So even though they're technically not close at the top two, they're not too far behind, and especially with Atlanta losing. New Orleans could end up jumping Atlanta, and it could be a battle between New Orleans and Tampa Bay for the division win. So we'll see how that goes, but definitely was right about this one fairly easily. Now, the last pick in my picks this week was my underdog pick of the week. Now, this is the one, for those that are new, where I pick a team that's favored to lose by more than 3 points to actually win the game. This week, I was right in my pick. So 1-0 this week. It brings me to 4-9 on my underdog pick of the week. I did forget to mention in the last set for my lock of the week, I'm now 10-3 on my lock of the week for this season. I've actually had 9 wins in a row, so great win streak for a lock of the week. But back to underdog pick of the week. So I did get this right. I'm 4-9 on the season. My pick this week was the Los Angeles Rams to pull off the upset against the Buffalo Bills. They were favored to lose by 3.5 points. They ended up winning by 2. The final score was 44-42. This was probably the best game of the week. Both teams were able to execute on offense pretty much nonstop. The only difference was, the thing that really stretched the lead was that the Rams were able to get a blocked punt that they returned for a touchdown, and that gave them a double-digit lead, and then Buffalo was basically clawing back the rest of the game. It did get a little dicey at the end of the game, and Buffalo thought they might have an opportunity to take the lead, but during their last touchdown drive, they made a crucial decision going for a quarterback sneak on like the 2-yard line, and they got stopped. They had to use the timeout when they had 3 left, which meant that after they scored the touchdown on the very next play, they would have to go for an onside kick, which, as Tom Brady pointed out on the broadcast, is only a 3% success rate. So, in my opinion, that was a huge blunder by McDermott. They definitely should have just went with 3 passes to the end zone so they didn't have to worry about a clock issue. Especially if you're thinking about running with Josh Allen, he doesn't have to run out of a quarterback sneak formation. You could just spread the team across and then just tell him to run if that's what you want to do, and then you can get back to the line. But I think they would have been better off throwing, at least attempting to throw the ball, and then if he scrambles to run, it's fine, and you don't have to use your timeouts. You set yourself up with a better situation to where you could kick the ball off and then play defense. Now, I don't necessarily know that they would have stopped the Rams from getting a first down, but that was their best option, and they blew it. The Rams, on the other hand, looked great. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp continue to dominate, one of the best receiver duos in the league, and ever since they've both been back healthy, you can see the momentum getting rolling with the Rams, and they look like they're definitely going to be a playoff contender. So this week was great for not only my underdog pick of the week, but all of my picks as I got them all correct. Now for the next segment this week, we're going to get into my question of the week. Now, for those who haven't seen my question of the week series, the question of the week is where I pose a question to you for you to answer. You can comment on YouTube, you can comment on Facebook, you can comment on Instagram. I want your feedback to let me know what you think is the answer to this question. And then if there's enough response, then I'll go over it in the next episode or two with what you guys responded and with what I think is the answer. So I'm going to give you 5 different options for the question, and then you guys are going to answer it in the comment section once this episode is uploaded. So this week's question of the week is, which second-tier team would be the most dangerous in the playoffs? So to clarify what I mean by second-tier team, these are teams that are not currently in my top 5 rankings, but they look like they should be able to make it to the playoffs or at least in playoff contention. So which one of these 5 teams that should be able to make it to the playoffs are going to be the most dangerous come playoff time to where other teams definitely don't want to play them? So to start with this list, the first option is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers are tied for the second best record in the AFC. For the longest time, we've always known that their defense was going to be great. They're always going to be able to get after the quarterback, especially with one of the best defensive linemen in the league in TJ Watt. But now with Russell Wilson at the helm, their offense has looked a lot more explosive, which has been their detriment in the last couple years. So with their offense being able to be explosive, their running game being able to be consistent, and their defense also being able to be consistent, is that the team that will be the most dangerous come playoff time out of this group. Now the next option for you will be the Green Bay Packers. Now the Green Bay Packers are also a top team in the NFC, not one of the top 2 teams, but they're definitely in that next tier group. Every time they play one of the top tier teams, it's a really close game, comes down to the wire, so they're definitely able to match up with any of these teams. Again, they're a balanced team. They're able to have explosive pass plays. They're also able to have great running plays, and their defense is still pretty good also. So I could definitely see the Green Bay Packers being a threat to some teams. So you let me know if they're the most dangerous. The other option would be the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Baltimore Ravens, for majority of the season, were actually in the top 5. A lot of people's pick during the preseason was for Baltimore to go to the Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson started off in a lot of people's eyes as the leader for MVP because of his statistical achievements. I did say that Derrick Henry was ahead of him in my book for most valuable player on their team. But nonetheless, Baltimore does have all the components of a team that can beat anyone on any given Sunday. They got a dominant running back. They've got probably the most explosive quarterback in the league. They have the ability to go deep on pass plays. They have receivers who can catch the ball underneath and make people miss. And their defense is going to fly around. So could Baltimore be that team that nobody wants to see in the playoffs? The fourth option for this most dangerous team is going to be the Washington Commanders. Now, a lot of people were sleeping on the Commanders earlier in the season, but if you look back at even their losses against good teams, they've played them close, so they've shown the ability to play against anyone. They have dealt with some injuries recently, but again, like I mentioned with these other teams, they're well balanced. They have a couple of good running backs, even though Eckler is hurt right now. Robinson is still running excellent. And, of course, they have a great passing effect with Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels throwing the ball. So they're definitely a dangerous team. And because I think that they're kind of under the radar, they're one of those teams that could surprise people come playoff time. So you let me know if they're one of the most dangerous. And then the last option for the question of the week is going to be the Los Angeles Rams. I did just mention them in my underdog pick of the week because that's who I picked to win, and they did. They, to me, showed that they can also beat anybody on any given week. They just beat arguably the best team in the AFC this week. Their offensive passing game is top notch. Another team, like I said, that might have the best receiver duo in the league. They definitely have a top 5 quarterback with Matthew Stafford, who's not only efficient, but he gotten the job done before. He is a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Their defense is starting to get a lot better than what we were expecting earlier in the season, so they could definitely be dangerous. So those are your 5 choices for this week's question of the week for which second-tier team will be the most dangerous come playoff time. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Green Bay Packers, the Baltimore Ravens, the Washington Commanders, or the Los Angeles Rams. You let me know what your answer is in the comment section, and I will get back to you. Now, lastly, of course, we got to finish with my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week number 14. So to start at number 1, we're going to go with the Detroit Lions. Detroit this week had a tough win Thursday night football game against their division rival Packers, and they were able to get the job done. Now brings their record to 12-1, so they're tied for the best record in the league. I believe they're on a 10-game win streak or 11-game win streak, so the longest win streak in the league right now. I've said it essentially every week that they've looked like the most balanced team, and every week they continue to prove me right, so no reason why they shouldn't still be the number 1 team in the league. Coming in at number 2, I'm going to stick with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles right now are 11-2. I know there was a lot of discussion this week about some of the talk after their game this week against Carolina. They were favored to win by 14 points. I knew that they had no chance of covering the spread. Carolina's a lot better team than people realize. I was going to pick them as my underdog pick of the week if I could justify saying that they definitely were going to cover that 14 points, but I realized in the essence of what the pick was, I'm like, that doesn't work. I can't just change the terms of it. So I didn't pick them, but as expected, that game was within a touchdown, and Carolina did have a chance to win, and they just blew it. But nonetheless, I don't think the Eagles fans should really get down on their team. Carolina's a good team, so them beating them in a close game is not anything to be ashamed of. Yes, their passing game does need to get better because come playoff time, they're going to need to be explosive in all facets of their offense in order to continue to win. But for now, I still believe that they look like the second best team in the league, so I'm leaving them there. At number 3 this week, I'm going to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are 12-1. They did, again, have the same thing we've been saying every single week with them having a close one-possession score, end-of-game type scenario. This week, it was a field goal that they got into range of. They ran the clock down. Their third-string kicker that they're now using this year kicks the ball. He hooks it left from the right hash mark, and doink, it hits the left upright and bounces in. As you guys know, I am a Chiefs fan, so I have to be honest. When he kicked that ball, I think my heart stopped for a couple seconds because I was like, I don't know how he shanked this close of a field goal, especially because he's known for being an accurate kicker. He's not known for having strong, lengthy kicks, but when it comes to accuracy, short range kicks, he's money. And this one he almost missed, but once again, they got the win. And as much as there's been so much talk about they should be able to blow teams out, look, if you keep winning, that's all that matters. If they go into the playoffs and they win by 1 point or 2 points every single week, guess what? They still end up being Super Bowl champs. And at the end of the day, that's all they really care about. So right now, they still deserve to be in the number 3 spot. Coming in at number 4, I got to go with the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are currently 11-2. I've been talking about it for a long time, but Minnesota has been flying under the radar. It's like barely anybody is really talking about how good Minnesota is. They pulled off a great win this week against the Arizona Cardinals, who have been flying high. Sam Darnold had a phenomenal game. He threw for 5 touchdowns, 2 to Justin Jefferson, 3 to Jordan Addison. They looked pretty much unstoppable in the passing game. A lot of people are now starting to talk about what's going to happen with Sam Darnold going into next year because he's only on a 1-year deal. They did draft J.J. McCarthy in the first round, and I guess according to what they felt in the preseason, they felt like he was going to be that next star. We'll see. It's really hard to tell your team that you're trying to win when you give up on the quarterback that's winning for you right now, but right now they don't have to worry about it since J.J. McCarthy is out for the season. So hopefully they can get the most out of Sam Darnold. And in Sam Darnold's case, even if Minnesota isn't planning on signing him back, the better he does this year, the bigger of a contract he'll sign with somebody else next year. So I think he's aware of that. We'll see how this team keeps it going, but they're definitely in the mix in this top 5, and they're at 4 this week. And then bringing in the rear at number 5, we got to go with the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are now 10-3. Yes, they did lose this week to the Rams, but they still had a great game. Josh Allen still leading for MVP. I believe he's the first person ever to have 3 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns in the same game. His team put up 42 points. They still lost. That wasn't his fault. So in terms of his accolades, I think he's in a very good spot. I think right now the only person that's really challenging him is Saquon Barkley. Barkley is on pace to break the single season rushing record. So if he's able to do that, and if Philadelphia remains above them in terms of overall record, I could see him taking over the lead. But as of right now, I do believe Josh Allen deserves MVP. So even though they did have a loss, I don't think that loss cost them enough to push them out of the top 5. Going back and forth between whether or not it should be them or Pittsburgh, I do think if they played right now on a neutral field that the Bills would be able to pull off the win, but it would be really close. So they deserve to round out this top 5. Now for the worst 5, at 28, we got to go with the New York Jets. New York Jets are 3-10. As I mentioned earlier, they're completely eliminated from playoff contention now. Aaron Rodgers had his best game of the season, but it wasn't enough, which speaks to the overall point that the Jets just aren't a good enough team. Who would have known that getting rid of Zach Wilson would have led to him to having a worse record this year than they did last year? It's completely surprising. We'll see what they do going into next year. I have a feeling everything's going to get blown up and they're going to start from scratch, but we'll see. They definitely deserve, though, to be in the 28 spot right now because they cannot close games at all. Coming in at number 29, I got to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, they've been a lot lower this week, but they did get a win this week. They are now 3-10. Even though Trevor Lawrence is out, Mac Jones was able to get the job done. Now, it wasn't an impressive win in the sense of they scored a lot of points, but a win is a win. Like I've been saying, they did beat the Tennessee Titans, which is a division rivalry game. So they got to move up because of it, and they are in that 29 spot. Coming in at number 30 is the team they beat, the Tennessee Titans, who are also 3-10. They lost. I've been saying all year that their defense is a lot better than people realize. They were able to hold Jacksonville to 10 points, but it wasn't enough. Why? Because, hello, Mr. Levis. He had that one good game against the Texans, and I said afterwards that I don't expect that to happen going forward. We've now gotten 2 weeks in a row with him not performing well, and there's pretty much no hope for Tennessee turning it around. But again, in their eyes, I feel like that's a good thing. The worse their record, the higher their draft pick, which means they get a chance to correct their mistake of picking a quarterback and him trying to become the franchise quarterback, because Will Levis is definitely not it. So there's, I believe, 3 quarterbacks that they're talking about should be at the top of the draft this year. So they should be in a spot to get one of those top 3 quarterbacks, and that should be their focus. Now, coming in at 31 is the Las Vegas Raiders. As I mentioned earlier, they lost this week as a part of my lock of the week. Nothing impressive for them. I've been saying for the longest time that they're essentially tanking, not on intentionally, but they should be. And they're right now, I believe, projected to have the number one pick in the draft, which I'm pretty sure would end up being Shador Sanders, considering his connection with Tom Brady and Tom Brady being a partial owner of the Raiders. But as far as this season goes, there's nothing positive to show for it, so they deserve to be in the 31 spot. But they're still not last, bringing in the rear at 32. I still got to stick with the New York Giants. The New York Giants are also 2-11, just like the Las Vegas Raiders. And they continue to lose, even in games where they're technically in contention at the end. They can't even get a field goal off. So, again, another team that's in a complete rebuild mode, and they deserve to be the worst team in the league right now at number 32. So that wraps it up for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.